Okay, we're going to move on now to Nicoletta Hoffmann. And Nicoletta Hoffmann is a woman human rights defender and life coach, protecting women's sex-based rights and human rights, lesbians' rights, protecting mothers and children from fathers' post-separation domestic violence. Her key focus is now on the situation in the European Parliament and the European Commission, who have refused to protect lesbians, mothers, and gender-critical feminists from all forms of male violence and structural violence. And the title of Nicoletta Hoffmann's talk is Collaborative Action Against EU Violence Against Women Directive. So welcome to Feminist Question Time, Nicoletta. It's great to have you here.
So how my work started, in my early 30s, I started to work as Chief of International Media Relations at Hungary's permanent representation to the EU. So I was actually the woman who made Hungary's campaign when we joined the EU. I was full enthusiasm. I was in my early 30s, had a toddler, life was good. I hoped to work for the Commission in a cabinet one day, so I was fully enthusiastic because I have been fed during communism that the EU is something fantastic. So it seems like miracle for me. And the early disappointment started when I realized that it's not how it looks like, that actually women's and children's rights are actually undermined by the European Union itself. And I realized it when I wanted to get divorced from my French husband. I was living and working in Belgium, was Hungarian, and he was French. And I realized that as a parent, as a primary caregiver parent, I have no freedom of movement. I couldn't move to the United Kingdom with my son without his permission. He wanted to coerce me into homelessness, unemployment, and the European Union law supports the abuser. So I realized it early, already in the 2005, 2006, there is a horrible Brussels II regulation which has been now amended, which makes actually from the primary caregiver parent a doormat. We know that 85% the mother is the primary caregiver parent. So I realized that the European Union as a legislator and as a political power wants to make from the primary caregiver parent, mostly the mother, a doormat of the non-resident parent and criminalize me if I want to offer for my son a better life. So I think for all of us feminist mothers, lesbian mothers, it's very clear that the EU law is weaponized on a first level to disenfranchise mothers who want to flee from violent fathers.
So was this law is part of the free movement of labour bit of the
Yes,
European
but mothers
Union
have no freedom
laws?
of movement.
Yes.
So as a single parent, even though the father doesn't, as a single mother who has shared custody, if the father does anything, whatever he wants with his life, he can do whatever he still has the right to coerce you to remain where the child is. You have no freedom of movement and you cannot offer a better life for your child. I think that's the biggest betrayal, and single parent poverty is skyrocketing even in Germany, or France in Germany knows this. So the EU is actively undermining its own primary goals, which are set out in the treaties to offer a better life. This is not working for lesbians, for mothers, for children. It's not working.
When they say free movement, or maybe for people, those people are the male people, aren't they?
Yes,
that's
of course.
What you found out. And then you challenged that. Can you tell
I challenged this. I challenged a lot of things, and I'm so grateful that I found Women's Declaration International, because you connect the dots, you know. And if we connect the dots together, we see that everything goes back to women's subordination. And if you sketch a little bit the surface, you see it. So what's happened, there was this EU regulation which forbids the freedom of movement of the primary caregiver parent with the child, actually. I lost over £2 million, my whole existence, because I moved anyway with my child because I didn't want to stay as a homeless, unemployed mother in Belgium. So first I moved back to Hungary. I was heavily punished by court as a child abductor, parental alienator, whatever you mean, wanting to offer for my son a better life. And then I had to flee in 2013 with my then 13 years old son to Austria, because the Belgian court gave the abusive father the custody of the child. And then there was a big scandal. I could make a big scandal. Case arrived at the Court of Justice of the European Union. How is it with the freedom of movement of single parents? Austrian Supreme Court asked, actually. And then everything was stopped because it was in 2016, father dropped the sole custody request and gave me sole custody because it was visible that people don't want that the case arrives at the Court of Justice of the EU, because everything would have been visible in 2016 that European secondary law is deliberately undermining the primary caregiver parent, mostly the mother, to protect the child from violence, to flee into another member state where there is a better protection, and to offer a better life for the child. So I could get sole custody, and my son just finished university in the United Kingdom. He's now an adult. But the devastating financial and reputational damage is still on my shoulder. I had to sell 2 apartments, had to work 6 years on the case, not to be imprisoned as a child abductor, because EU law is bad. In the meanwhile, they made a recast of this Brussels IIa regulation. It's even worse.
You've also got the insight in the Violence Against Women declaration, that's a directive that's coming out.
Directive, yes. And then I made a complaint. I started to make complaints. It's my job. I mean, I started to work when I lost everything as a language teacher, but it's my job. I can make good complaints. And to my biggest surprise, the answer was, we don't care. So they made now a new directive against, it's a proposal, violence against women. So I started to campaign and say, Commissioner Helena Dalli, European Parliament, everybody, hello ladies, pigs have more rights like mothers and children. You must do something, you must look at the law, why the law is bad, and then do additional amendments in the Brussels II regulation or the new version, and then the directive combating violence against women must help victims of domestic violence to flee into a better country. Oh, they didn't listen. They didn't listen, and now the new Violence Against Women directive proposal came out. Obviously, they leave mothers, children, lesbians, gender-critical feminists, everybody behind. So I think it's deliberate. I have now over 800 pages proof that it's deliberate.
Do you think it's actively bad against women, this new directive?
Yes, they actively harm. Yes, I have been. Yes, of course they do it. There are hundreds of emails which I have sent, court cases. Mothers are sending, there is a mother now who is in asylum in Switzerland, British Croatian mother. Mothers are seeking asylum because of the EU. The law is so bad. So I think this has reached now a point that they cannot hide it, that they deliberately, actively harming mother and children who want to flee from violence.
Our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights is what we're mostly focused on, the problems with implementing gender identity ideology. What have you found in Brussels is going on about that?
So the undermining, they started with the disenfranchisement and undermining of mothers and children who need protection from fathers' violence. This was already done in the early 2000s. Now they have put the assassination of women's sex-based rights, and I think assassination is the right word, to a whole new level. They are implementing gender identity ideology as if it would be in the treaties, but it is not. It's just a belief. And we have now reached a completely absurd situation that the far-right political groups or right-wing political groups in the European Parliament exposing this. That gender identity ideology is just a belief. Nobody should be labeled as anti-gender, as a fascist, neo-Nazi or whatever, just because you don't believe in gender identity ideology. And actually in the parliament, several political groups are deliberately undermining women's rights to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. They are labeling, naming, shaming us as anti-gender. It's all unlawful. And now what's happened? This new directive, which should combat violence, it's not yet a directive, it's a proposal for a directive, to combat violence against women and domestic violence. It's still in the proposal state, but it's obviously left mothers and children behind, we know it, and it brought gender identity ideology unlawfully through the back door to a new level, because in Article 10, they want to enable the member states to criminalize everybody who is spreading online hatred because of gender. This means we see it already clearly. What is the goal of this directive, the hidden goal? We must expose it. In Article 10, they want to enable the criminalization of gender critical feminists and lesbians. So Article 10 is so bad, it should not be named as a law. So we want to collaborate now with criminologists, with law professors around the world, and make several complaints, not only because of the directive, but because of the dangerous Article 10, which is completely bonkers and enables the criminalization and imprisonment of innocent people.
Although the right wing in the parliament are articulating some of the arguments, they will certainly not be on our side to defend lesbians and gender critical feminists, because they don't actually want, I mean, they don't want us in the debate. They sort of overlook us because they don't want women to know we exist, because they want to offer, their offer is the submissive housewife. So we are in it's a very difficult place. Have you found women like you, or supporters of, you know, sort of women's sex-based rights in the institutions or around Brussels who are articulating our positions? No.
No, nobody.
Oh.
Nobody, but I think what we have to do and what we can do, I used to work as chief of international media relations. So the only thing we can do is to make a scandal and to demand public participation in the European Parliament, and to use the legal framework, because primary European Union law is on our side. The money is there. So what we can do, I mean, have allies in the member states, women's organizations, lesbians, mothers, and put everything what we know on the table and demand support and place.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got this very good experience of taking something to the Court of Human Rights, or to, you know, challenging something at quite a high court in Europe. And it could be that if you think of an action, then we've got, as WDI, we've got these 35,000 signatories, many of whom are in the European Union, and we've got lots of organizations. We could try to build a campaign.
Yes, we must campaign, Joe. We must campaign, Joe. And then my experiences during my own custody case, that was a time when I was completely deplatformed, because nobody allowed me to write and speak about this, but I still could win, because if you speak truth to power and you have people on your side, I think they are afraid. They are afraid. And we need to expose what's going on, and Women's Declaration is fantastic. With the tools you have, I'm not pleasing you, now it's true. With the knowledge we have in Women's Declaration, we can expose. Yeah. So we have the tools to expose the blatant lies, the undermining of the treaties, and we don't need the far right. We can say, invite us, give us the money, what we must have according to the treaties. Because this violence is causing billions of euros damage for the European citizens. So violence against women and children is causing, modest estimation, 300-400 billion euro damage a year for the taxpayers and for the states, mostly for the taxpayers, for the victims. It's a mass.
Can you clarify, Nicoletta, if you're referring to Article 10 of the ECHR?
No, I'm referring to Article 10 is in the proposal. Article 10 is in the proposal which the European Commission put on the table. It's a European Commission proposal for a directive combating violence against women and domestic violence. If adopted, then the member states must translate this directive into their national legal systems, so it will penetrate like a penis into the member states' legal systems, which will have the opportunity to criminalize, because of online hatred, cyber hatred, everybody who doesn't affirm the gender identity of a man or somebody else.
I'm beginning to think that this pattern is almost, it could have been in the Dentons Playbook. There was this Dentons legal firm that wrote about 4 or 5 years ago about how this should, the Yogyakarta principles should be implemented. And I think using violence against women and the government's campaigning against it is being done everywhere, because in Britain, where I am and many of us are, there's a lot of action by the government and by local authorities and institutions saying violence against women is very bad. And I think it might be a bit of a smokescreen that they're using that, and then the ultimate revelation of what they're trying to do comes in this directive. They're making it very clear how that's going to be turned against us. So while looking good, oh, we're against violence against women, they're actually going to be undermining a lot of our rights, it sounds like.
The real surprise is that the Istanbul Convention itself is undermining women's rights and children's rights. It's undermining. It's a Trojan horse, the Istanbul Convention, because it will support gender identity. So they started to say, no, it's just a role, but no, if you read the Istanbul Convention, you realize that it doesn't recognize women as a sex class with sex-based rights. So at this point, it is pointless. And the member states also don't implement, only 21 have ratified it from the EU. So it's a completely toothless tool and a Trojan horse. And now the EU wants to ratify it. 6 member states opposed it as a Trojan horse. They don't want it. Mostly far-right governments like in Hungary. But the EU Commission and the Parliament went to the Court of Justice, which allowed through the back door the EU still to ratify it, even though some member states don't like it.